Would you like to come out and see us? Come break your heart and put it back again. Or would you like to answer the questions of what we're wrong with women and men? Do you think that you could ever put it on the line? Do you think that you could even spare the time?
I never made a request before that I thought would have so much impact. And at the time when I made the request, I had no idea there was 12 guys sitting around the grass at UT Tower, and freshmen, 18-year-old guys. And I said, I want y'all to write down 5 things a day, no repeats, 35 a week. Things you're thankful for. At the time, I had no idea how that would affect me so profoundly and affect so many of the students that I've spent time with. John Porter, one of those students, 4 years later, came over to my house, and to my great surprise, he throws 2 notebooks on the table. And in these 2 notebooks, he had not quit. He literally was thousands in, and he'd written down thousands of different things he was thankful for over the years. And I remember him telling me, it was just so wonderful to sit there and talk to him, but I remember him telling me that he had kind of gone from it was never enough in life to everything's a challenge and a privilege. And I thought, if that transformation could take place in our minds, what a great thing if that transformation could take place. And we continued to talk for a while, and we kind of came to a bunch of different conclusions, like choosing, it's not necessarily a disposition to be grateful all the time. It's kind of a choice that we kind of choose. It's a discipline. It's kind of an obedience that we choose to be grateful. And we talked about that for a while, and we talked about just the change in his spirit over the years, being grateful. It's really a joyful, wonderful time to talk to him. And he's 10 years out from being a student at the university, and just still continuing. I don't know how many, if he's in 10,000 or 20, but he continues to write down these things he's thankful for. If you, in my small group over the years, you would know that almost every single week I start out with, what are you thankful for? And I get a lot of heat for it. But when you are with freshmen, the way that plays out usually is a lot of crickets, a lot of nothing. It's usually the weather, and that's about it. But I've noticed over the years, after practicing this and speaking this so many times to guys, that they begin to notice little small things and big things in their life, and they begin to speak gratitude, and they begin to see how much the Lord gifts them on a daily basis, but not only on a daily basis, but in huge ways. And I've noticed it really affect the spirit of our group, that we have a spirit of gratitude. And who doesn't want to be around somebody that's grateful? But it really has affected and impacted the way the spirit of the groups that I've spent time with have played out. And I see this in my own life when I've spoken gratitude over and over to my family, and had my sons and my wife, and we sit around the table and we talk about what we're grateful, and then we train ourselves. The Lord is pretty clear on gratitude. He says to be grateful, right? I always refer back to Paul in Romans 1, and it says this in Romans 1. It's pretty interesting. It says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him nor gave him thanks. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened." I always thought it was interesting that he equated being thankfulness and acknowledging him to leading to sin. Not sin kind of starting the whole problem, and then it ends up with a lack of gratitude and everything else. That it really almost came first. And I don't know if that was Paul's total intention, but it makes a lot of sense to me that when my heart's not grateful and I'm not acknowledging God in what I'm doing, that I begin to have this attitude of ungratefulness. Well, I've seen over and over the years, students come to me and say, I'm still writing in my journal. I'm beginning to be more and more grateful. I'm noticing things I've never noticed. I'm beginning to see the 70% good that my best friend is doing instead of the 20 that's not good, or the 30% that's not good. And the dynamic of how it changes relationships. I've also seen how vulnerable it creates a certain vulnerability, because you can really kind of tell when your heart's not grateful, and you can see how it affects the way you're living every day. And I have just had a great journey over the last 13 years of just hundreds of students beginning to live this life of gratitude that God called us to. Jesus speaks about this in Luke 17, and it says this: Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. So these 10 lepers. And when he saw them, he said, Go, show yourselves to the priests. It's an interesting comment. And he says, as they went, they were all cleansed. I mean, it must have been amazing to be walking along the road, all of them, and looking at each other, and them all being cleansed from this horrific disease. And it says, one of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and he thanked him. He was a Samaritan. It's interesting. It says, this is what Jesus says then. Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to them, Rise and go, your faith has made you well. It's kind of fascinating to me that Jesus equates his faith to his gratitude. The man didn't do anything. He didn't heal himself. He hadn't really done anything but thank God, and how Jesus spoke about this as an act of faith. And so as we move on, I think it's almost an impossibility to set aside us practicing this obedience of gratitude and the joy in which this brings our lives, but also just the impact it can make on every day, the environment and our groups and the way we learn and care for each other. So.